Picture the Bird's Nest Stadium in Beijing. August 2008. Fireworks exploding over a city of 20 million people, the whole world watching. And one thought running through every boardroom, every government office, every financial institution on Earth: the 21st century belongs to China. That wasn't paranoia. That wasn't exaggeration. That was the consensus. The GDP numbers were doubling every decade. The factories were running 24 hours a day. The cities were rising out of farmland at a speed that had no precedent in human history. And for a moment, a long, intoxicating moment, it seemed like nothing could stop it. But here's what nobody wanted to say out loud. The foundation of that miracle was not productivity. It was not innovation. It was not a new economic model that had outsmarted capitalism. It was debt, ghost cities, falsified population data, and a social contract with its own people that is now breaking apart in ways that will send shockwaves directly into your life. Welcome to the Elite Code, where we strip away the comfortable narratives and look at the raw architecture of power. Today's question is not about China. It's about you. When the world's second-largest economy begins to hollow out from the inside, what happens to American jobs? What happens to American prices? What happens to the investments sitting in your 401k? And more importantly, are we watching a mirror? Because some of the same cracks that are splitting China's foundation open are quietly appearing in ours. Let's start at the beginning. For 40 years, the story sold to the world was simple. China lifted 800 million people out of poverty. Through sheer discipline, central planning, and scale, they built an economic machine unlike anything history had ever seen. And that story is not entirely false. But here's what the official numbers never told you. In early 2026, economic analysts at the American Enterprise Institute published a detailed review of Chinese GDP data going back to 2003. Their conclusion was stunning. China's official GDP figures have likely been systematically overstated for over 2 decades. Fixed investment data was revised downward by 15% in 2025 alone. Local officials across the country, measured and promoted based on growth metrics, had been inflating the numbers for their own political survival. The same dynamic that corrupted the economic data also corrupted the population data. Fuxian, a demographer at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, spent decades analyzing China's census figures. His conclusion: China's real population may be 100 million people lower than officially reported. 100 million people, that is the entire population of Egypt or the Philippines, simply not there. Local officials had registered ghost births, fictitious children, to claim larger education and healthcare budgets from the central government. These phantom citizens lived in spreadsheets. They never drew breath. And for years, the world's most consequential economic decisions about supply chains, about trade policy, about manufacturing capacity were made based on numbers that were partly fiction. That is the foundation we're standing on. Walk through any major Chinese city today and you'll see something that doesn't add up. Towers of glass and steel, hundreds of them, 50, 60, 80 stories tall, half of them empty, not under construction, not being renovated, just empty, lights off, lobbies dark, grass growing through the concrete in the parking structures below. This is what happens when you build an economy on the wrong kind of growth. Before 2021, the real estate sector, including construction, sales, and all related industries, accounted for approximately 30% of China's entire GDP. 30%. For comparison, at the peak of America's own housing bubble in 2006, real estate was about 6% of U.S. GDP. China was running an economy 5 times as dependent on real estate as the United States was during the worst bubble in modern American history. And the mechanism was the same Ponzi logic. Developers borrowed money, sold apartments to buyers who paid up front, sometimes years before the building was finished, used that cash to buy more land, borrowed against the land to fund more projects, and so on, until it stopped. When Evergrande, the world's most indebted real estate company, carrying over $300 billion in liabilities, collapsed in 2021. It didn't just take down a corporation. It detonated the psychological foundation on which hundreds of millions of Chinese families had built their sense of financial security. In China, where stock markets are tightly controlled and foreign investment is restricted, real estate was the only safe place most people could put their money. 70% of Chinese household wealth was tied up in property. When property values started falling, and they fell by more than 50% in terms of new construction by 2025, the net worth of the Chinese middle class evaporated, consumer confidence collapsed, spending dried up, and the government was left holding a system requiring trillions in ongoing support just to prevent a disorderly crash. Total debt, government, corporate, and household combined, is now estimated at approximately 300% of GDP by international financial institutions. That is a number that does not have a clean resolution. That is a number that echoes through decades. And here is where you come in. You might be thinking, that sounds like China's problem. Not mine. I want to spend a moment on why that instinct is wrong. The United States and China are two separate economies that occasionally trade with each other. They are two organs in the same body, and when one organ starts failing, the other one feels it, whether it wants to or not. Let's start with the most immediate impact: prices at the store. According to researchers at UCLA Anderson School of Management, in their 2025 annual U.S.-China Economic Report, American importers and consumers bear the majority of the burden when trade flows between the two countries are disrupted. Under current tariff structures, the estimated additional cost to American households is somewhere around $213 billion in annual spending. Spread across the entire U.S. economy, that translates to roughly a 1.1% increase in the overall price level. Before you account for secondary effects, that is money coming directly out of your grocery budget, your clothing budget, your electronics budget. Because here is the uncomfortable truth: the affordable life that most middle-class Americans live was built, substantially, on cheap Chinese manufacturing. The $15 Walmart shirt, the $800 iPhone assembled for a fraction of that. The affordable furniture, the affordable tools, the affordable appliances, all of it was underwritten by Chinese workers earning wages that American workers could never accept, and in many cases, by Chinese government subsidies that made the economics work in ways that pure market competition never would have. That era is ending, and the replacement, whether it's Vietnam, India, Mexico, or American reshoring, will not be as cheap. But here's the twist: before the era ends completely, there's a dangerous middle phase. China's domestic economy is deflationary right now. Consumer prices have been falling. Retail sales growth in 2024 was a mere 3.5%, less than inflation, meaning real consumer spending was effectively contracting. Chinese households, terrified about the future, are hoarding cash. By mid-2025, Chinese households held nearly 120 trillion yuan in savings deposits, more than double what they held in 2020. All that suppressed domestic demand means Chinese factories are producing goods that their own people won't buy, and that surplus has to go somewhere. Economists are calling it China Shock 2.0, the first China shock, in the late 1990s and 2000s, contributed to the closure of factories across the American Midwest and the permanent loss of millions of manufacturing jobs. The second China shock is different in character, but equally dangerous. This time, it's not cheap t-shirts and toys, it's electric vehicles, solar panels, advanced batteries, steel, aluminum, state-subsidized, produced at a scale no private company could match, priced at levels designed not to make profit, but to capture global market share. When those goods hit American markets, or the markets of countries that compete with American manufacturers, the effect is the same. Factories close, jobs disappear, communities hollow out. And the cruel irony is that American consumers briefly get cheaper prices, right up until the moment the domestic producers are gone and there's no one left to compete with. That's the trap. Now I want to take you somewhere deeper, because the most dangerous lesson in China's story is not the debt. It's not the ghost cities, it's not even the trade dynamics. It's the demographic collapse, and it contains a warning for the United States that almost no one in mainstream media is willing to say clearly. China's birth rate has fallen to 1.09. The replacement rate, the number needed just to keep a population stable, is 2.1. At 1.09, China is not just shrinking. It's entering a demographic death spiral that took generations to create and will take generations, if ever, to reverse. The consequences are mathematical and merciless. The labor force peaked in 2014 and has been contracting by millions of workers per year. The population aged 65 and older is exploding, projected to reach 400 million people by 2035. China's pension fund, according to the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, is at risk of complete insolvency by 2035. The social structure this has created is what Chinese researchers call the 4-to-1 problem: one child to parents, for grandparents, a single working-age adult carrying the financial weight of 6 people. Now here's the mirror I mentioned at the beginning. The United States is not China. Our demographic situation is meaningfully different, partly because of immigration. But let me give you a number that should make you pause. America's birth rate in 2023 hit 1.62, still above China's, still far below the replacement rate of 2.1. We are not in crisis, but we are trending in the same direction. And unlike China, we have chosen immigration as our pressure valve, our way of keeping the labor force growing while native birth rates fall. The political battle over immigration in America is not just about culture or borders. It is, at its root, a battle over whether America will solve the same demographic math that is right now slowly strangling China. That's the conversation we should be having, but we're not having it. Let me tell you about a word you may not know. Tangping. In Mandarin, it means lying flat. It describes a movement, if you can even call it that, of young Chinese people who have decided to opt out. No career climbing, no marriage, no children, no home ownership, no participation in the economic machine. Just existing, at minimum cost, with minimum ambition. Before you judge them, understand what they're responding to. The average price of an apartment in Beijing or Shenzhen is now 30 to 40 times the average annual salary of a young professional. Work culture in the major Chinese tech and finance firms is referred to as 996, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, and after a decade of that, you still cannot afford a home. You still cannot afford to start a family. You still cannot build the life your parents' generation was promised. The youth unemployment rate for Chinese 16 to 24-year-olds hit a record 21% in mid-2023. The government was so alarmed by the number that they stopped publishing it for several months, re-emerging only after methodological adjustments brought the figure down. When a government has to hide its own unemployment data from its own people, you are looking at a system that has lost the narrative, and the generation that gave up is the generation that was supposed to fuel the next 40 years of Chinese growth. Now I want to ask you something uncomfortable. Walk down any college campus in America today. Talk to a 23-year-old drowning in student loan debt, unable to afford a first apartment, watching home prices at 6, 7, 8 times their annual salary. What do you hear? The language is different. The context is different, but the feeling that the system was built for someone else. The feeling that no matter how hard you work, the finish line keeps moving. The feeling that the game is rigged. That feeling is not uniquely Chinese, and the decisions that follow from that feeling, whether to invest, to build, to start a family, to commit, those decisions shape an economy. A society of people who believe in the future builds one. A society of people who don't, doesn't? Here is something the financial media is not telling you clearly enough. China's wealthy are leaving, and they are bringing their money here. According to data from Henley and Partners, the global firm that tracks millionaire migration, China has ranked among the world's top sources of millionaire outflows for multiple consecutive years. In 2024 alone, an estimated 15,200 high-net-worth Chinese individuals emigrated permanently. The top destinations: the United States, Canada, and Singapore. Chinese buyers purchased $13.7 billion in American real estate in 2024 and 2025, an 83% increase from the previous year. Average purchase price, $1.2 million, and critically to 71% of those purchases were made in cash. Let that sink in. While millions of American first-time buyers are being priced out of the housing market, unable to compete with 7% mortgage rates, a wave of Chinese capital is flooding into American real estate with no financing required. This is not inherently sinister. Capital seeking safety is a rational thing, but it has consequences. It contributes to elevated housing prices in markets that are already unaffordable for working Americans. It inflates asset prices, which looks great if you own assets, and crushes you if you don't. And it represents something philosophically significant. The people who built their wealth inside China's system do not trust China's system to protect it. They are voting with their feet, and their dollars, and their children's futures, when the architects of the Chinese miracle are quietly their families to California and Vancouver and Singapore. That tells you something that no official GDP report ever will. I promised you this wasn't just about China. So let me be direct. China's crisis has three structural roots. 1. A growth model built on debt rather than genuine productivity. 2. Government intervention that destroyed private sector confidence and innovation. 3. A demographic collapse accelerated by policies that treated human reproduction as a variable to be optimized. Now let's look at America. On debt, U.S. federal debt crossed $36 trillion in 2025. As a percentage of GDP, we are at levels not seen since World War II. The Congressional Budget Office projects that within the next decade, interest payments alone on the federal debt will exceed the entire defense budget. We are not at China's 300% total debt to GDP ratio. But we are on a trajectory, and the trajectory is not changing. On government intervention, we are not China. Our system has genuine checks on arbitrary power. Property rights are constitutionally protected. Rule of law is real. But the relationship between government and private enterprise has shifted meaningfully in the last decade. Regulatory uncertainty has become a genuine constraint on investment. The tax code has become a maze that rewards political connection over pure economic productivity. And increasingly, businesses make location decisions based not on where is most efficient, but on where is most protected from regulatory risk. That is a small version of the same dynamic that made Jack Ma disappear for 3 months. The specifics are completely different. The underlying logic has echoes. On demographics, I've already given you the birth rate number. 1.62, below replacement, falling. The United States has a demographic cushion that China does not. Immigration has kept our working-age population from the kind of freefall China is experiencing. But the political will to maintain that cushion is deeply uncertain, and the cost of family formation in America, child care, housing, healthcare, education, is now so high that the economic incentives for having children look increasingly like the incentives that drove Taiping in China. I am not saying America is China. I am saying America has some of China's inputs. And that should prompt serious questions about whether we will end up with some of China's outputs. When a giant stumbles, the smart money moves before the crowd. The supply chain repositioning that is happening right now, what analysts call China Plus One or friendshoring, is one of the largest capital allocation shifts in modern economic history. Manufacturing that was in Guangdong is moving to Ho Chi Minh City, to Chennai, to Monterey, and increasingly to the American South and Midwest, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act's manufacturing provisions, the reshoring of semiconductor fabs, the battery gigafactories rising in Kentucky and Georgia and Michigan. These are real, they are happening, and they represent genuine investment opportunity for Americans who understand what's driving them. When supply chains move, real estate values move. Labor markets tighten. Infrastructure gets built. The communities that attract this reshoring will look different in 2035 than they do today. Just as the communities that lost manufacturing in the 2000s look different from what they were before. This is not a guarantee of easy returns. It's a map of where economic activity is moving and where it's leaving. On the financial side, the flight of Chinese capital into American markets has real implications for where asset prices go. It has already put upward pressure on high-end real estate. It is flowing into American equities, particularly tech stocks, because Chinese investors, like all capital in flight, seek depth, liquidity, and rule of law. Understanding this flow is not about celebrating it or condemning it. It's about seeing the water and deciding whether you're swimming with it or against it. And for those thinking about their own financial resilience, the lesson from China's middle class is brutally clear. When 70% of your net worth is in a single asset class, in a single country, in a single political system, you are not diversified, you are concentrated, and concentration is fine, right up until the moment it isn't. The Chinese families who saw their wealth evaporate in the property crash weren't foolish people. They were people who believed that the rules of the game would stay the same. The rules changed overnight. Let me bring you back to that stadium. Beijing, 2008. Fireworks over the bird's nest, the whole world holding its breath. The century belonged to China, the numbers said so, the Skylines said so. The sheer scale of it said so, except, behind the skyline, empty apartments. Behind the growth numbers, falsified data. Behind the demographic power, a birth rate in free fall. Behind the national confidence, a generation quietly lying flat, checking out of a system that promised them everything and delivered less and less. The most important economic lesson of the last 25 years is not about China. It's about what happens when a system optimizes for the appearance of strength rather than the reality of it. When the numbers matter more than the people behind them. When political necessity overrides economic truth. When debt is confused for wealth. When control is confused for stability. These are not uniquely Chinese temptations. These are human temptations, institutional temptations. And they do not announce themselves with warning sirens. They announce themselves with empty buildings in the middle of nowhere, with young people who can't afford apartments, so they stop trying, with capital quietly packing its bags in the middle of the night. The giant is not falling, not today, not dramatically, but it is hollowing out, and what fills the space it leaves behind depends on the choices we make, as individuals, as investors, as a society, right now. While there's still time to choose, if this analysis gave you a framework for seeing what most people are missing, share it with someone who needs to see it. Hit like. Subscribe to the Elite Code. We'll keep decoding the hidden architecture of global power, so you can see what's coming before it arrives at your door. See you in the next one.